Welcome to the Church Vibes Podcast with Jordan and Maddie, the podcast where we talk about all things Christian, all things culture, and all things Christian culture. This is a space where we love having tough conversations. It's our hope that whether you're a dedicated follower of Christ, you've never stepped foot in a church or opened a Bible in your life, or you're anywhere in between, you'll be able to learn something new, think about something differently, or be encouraged in some small way. Now, on to the show.
What's up, you guys? Jordan here.
Grace and peace, everybody. It's Maddie, and welcome to episode 9 of the Church Vibes Podcast.
Episode 9. See, we mentioned it once that I always say that. Now I just have to from now on, I guess. But I'm super excited today. We have a somewhat special episode, I would say.
Yeah, we're doing things a little bit differently. We told you guys that we're going to be doing a couple of interview episodes. And so today is actually the first of the interview episodes where I am going to be interviewing Jordan.
Woo! So I guess we'll get into it in a second, but I wanted to go back on a change we made recently, and that was going to, I guess, bi-weekly or every other week for our episodes. Now, the thing is, that's a temporary thing because I'm actually going to be moving up to Washington with Maddie.
Wait, you're moving?
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. I'm just kidding. Maddie has known this, but we've kept it on the DL for a minute until we could, talk about it. But in a short, we're going to get into more detail on that in a little bit. We want to touch on some of the questions that you guys gave us. But just to say, in a not too long time, we're going to go back to our weekly format because we'll be able to be in a studio together and recording, and it's going to be awesome. So I'm going to leave you on that cliffhanger, and we'll come back to it. See, that's the way of me making you listen to the whole thing, because now you're going to wonder how and why and all that. So, I got you. But
Caught
Maddie,
them in the loophole.
I'm gonna throw this off to you before I sound too silly.
Yeah, definitely. So that's really exciting news. We're all really excited about that. But we want to get into some questions that our listeners sent in for me to ask you. So the first one is a very serious question. It's very controversial. So if you don't want to answer it, I totally understand. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Oh man. First of all, 100% no. I mean, if I order a Hawaiian pizza, I am ripping the pineapples off, but then I still taste the juice of the pineapple that was cooked into it, and it's just no. Like, okay, I get that tomato is a fruit and it's on the pizza, whatever, but pineapple is a real fruit, an actual sweet fruit, and it does not belong with like savory things, in my opinion. I mean, if there was a total dessert pizza. Well, no, not even then. I can't even say I would want it then. I'm not a huge pineapple guy anyway, and
Okay.
so the last place it's going to be is on my pizza. I'm sorry.
Wow, I think we just lost 50% of our listeners, so thanks for that.
We went from
Let's
like
move
2
on.
listeners to 1. I'm just kidding.
Well, let's move on to something also quite controversial. What is your favorite snack?
Okay, so I don't know if I've ever shared, but I'm a diabetic and type 1. And so if any of you are that, you know that cravings are a real thing. And so my first answer would be all of them for favorite snack.
All of the snacks.
But on a real note, they're a company called Smart Sweets, and they make actual sugar-free and actual like super, super low-carb candies. And they happen to make some of my favorite ones. Like I love Swedish Fish, and they have their own version. I love Sour Patch Kids. They have their own. And this is not a sponsored episode, I swear, but they're about to drop watermelons, which I love sour watermelons.
Ooh.
So I'm going to say that's my favorite snack. I also do have to shout out to brother Tom. I love Pringles too. Him and I have a thing.
Yeah, that's like his favorite thing in the world is Pringles, pretty much.
But yeah, no, I can't top those Smart Sweets. It's an actual candy I can eat without any kind of guilt or messing my blood sugar up, anything like that. That's definitely, I think, what I'm going to say for that. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good answer. Okay, so we're jokingly saying that these past couple questions were controversial, but now we do have a couple of questions that are a little bit more serious. We like to be a little fun, a little serious, a little mixture of both on this podcast. So the next question is, what are your go-to verses when you feel disconnected from God, the church, other people, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, so, when I first hear that question, I think it's a little bit deeper than just feeling disconnected from, because you're not saying just God, you're saying from people, from your church, from everybody. And so I see that more of
Right.
an issue of maybe some loneliness and depression. And so
Mm.
my advice would be some verses for that. And so first of all, I'm gonna give you like I think three. Yeah. Um, so first of all, I just want to say you were never far from God in that God is with you always, but we can have times where we feel disconnected. And so um
Yeah.
even that fact right there, that truth is kind of comforting to me sometimes because I go through that same issue in my own daily life sometimes. But the first is, Deuteronomy 31:6. I'm just in the NIV. That's just what I pulled up. But it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." That kind of backs up what I just said. He is
It's one of my
always,
favorites.
yeah, right. It's one of my favorites too. He's always with us. Um, but then I also love, I was studying in Psalms 18, verse 6. It says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears." And so when I see that, so God may be, I guess if you want to say like far away, like, I mean, he's in heaven, he's in his, the Holy of Holies. Um, but this verse says, even as far away as heaven, he heard your voice and he heard when you cried.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
so, you know, I'm gonna piggyback and not piggyback. I'm gonna add to that question of like I don't want to just give a verse, but a little bit of thoughts. You know, you just have to try talking to him. Because he is nearby. Um, and so he is here waiting to hear our cries, regardless of how that's a whole theological thing, right? Because I just said he's close, but yeah, you know what I'm saying. He is with us in our
Yeah.
hearts, but he hears our voices no matter what. Um, but then the other one is John 14, another solid chapter, verse 26. I don't have my glasses, so I'm a little blind. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send you in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I've said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as this world. I give to you. Let your hearts not be troubled, neither let them be afraid. And so, what I really like is, I guess I keep going back to the fact that God is with you. And Jesus was like,
Hmm.
"Listen, guys, I am physically leaving this place, but I'm gonna give you a helper. I'm gonna give you a bit of a babysitter that's gonna always be there and it's gonna protect you while I'm gone. I'll be back, but for now, here's this, and check it out. He can stay in your hearts." And so, um, I think with all those again, I'm gonna if anyone's taking notes, it's Deuteronomy 31:6, Psalm 18:6, and John 14:26. I love those verses because it really just solidifies the fact that you may feel that you're alone. You may feel like it is just you and God's far away, but He's not. He is right there. And there's another verse that says, "I stand at the door and knock." Like if you're there to listen, He's right there waiting to talk to you and to come into your heart again. And so whoever asked this question, don't be dismayed. Just keep trying to push forward. I take it you're a Christian if you're asking for Bible verses on the topic. So just know that He is in your hearts. Um, and you just gotta just maybe try to pray and say, "God, help me," or "God, I don't feel you right
Yeah.
now," and that's okay. And I say this a lot, but it's okay not to be okay. Don't feel bad for feeling that way, and just know that
Hmm.
that He is there and He's ready to step in and like make it all better.
Yeah. And we actually, for anybody that is listening that maybe hasn't listened to all of our old episodes, in episode 6, we actually talked about this
That's right. Yeah.
general topic as our main topic, drawing closer to God. And so, for the person that asked this, but also just to anybody out there who is listening who may be feeling the same way, in that episode, Jordan and I both provided some verses, talked about personal experiences, and also provided some really great resources as well. So that would be something for people to check out, I think, too, would be episode 6 of the Church Vibes podcast.
Yeah, and going back on that really quick, because if you've listened to almost any episode, I'm really big on advocating for mental health.
Yeah.
Either the person that asked this question or if someone else is like, "Man, I really feel that," you can DM me or message me personally. I have lots of other things I can help you with. We can go a lot deeper into the topic. But for now, there's your verses.
Great. Okay. So, as far as listener questions, we have one more. And this question is, what was the moment you felt most connected to God?
Man, so it's hard to pinpoint a singular moment. I feel like sometimes I have
Yeah.
the memory of an 80-year-old, and I'm like, I just don't remember anymore. Um, but I will say, I'll answer that in two ways. So the first way, the first time I really felt connected, because I feel like this is not a singular moment, and it shouldn't be. It should be all the time. It should be throughout your life, where you feel super connected. Was the one time I got to go to like Christian camp or Bible camp, because I got saved at like like right before being an adult. So I got one summer to be in youth group as a kid, where I was worshiping. It might have been the third or fourth night. If you've been to a camp like that, it's like worship all the time, right? And a couple games here and there, but it's like chapel in the morning, chapel at lunchtime, chapel in the evening. And so I felt like God had really been breaking me down for like the first couple days. And then I want to say, like I said, third or fourth night, I just found myself like on the floor crying, just overcome by the Holy Spirit and just really feeling God. And that was, I always say that's the moment where I was like all in. I was already a Christian, but I'm like, this is
Okay.
the
Yeah.
moment. Um, but the other way I want to answer that is, when do I feel most connected? And it's really when I am engaged in my job, when I'm engaged either at the soundboard or somewhere behind the scenes during worship on a Sunday morning,
Okay.
or on the few times where I get to actually play worship and be on stage. Something about that, everything just clicks. And especially when it's funny, especially when I'm at the soundboard, you wouldn't think much of that, but like I really get into it and I just feel so connected and moved because everything's just flowing. I don't know how to explain it, but so get me on a good Sunday morning. That's probably a cliche answer, I know, but it's when I'm like it deep in my talents, and that should be for other people too. When you're deep in that God-given talent you have, that's when you should feel, I would hope to feel super connected, because God's like, "Oh my goodness, you're doing the thing I gave you for me, and you're just into it." So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. When we are honoring God and serving his body
right.
by doing the things that he has created us to do, it's a really powerful experience. So, those were our listener questions, which now means that we get to go into the official interview segment,
Oh
which
man,
is where I will be interviewing you, Jordan, about what's been going on in your life, where you're at, where you see yourself headed, how things have been with you and God, all of that really good stuff. So, for all of you that are listening, you're definitely going to want to stick around because this is going to be really good. So, if you are good to go, I think I will just go ahead and jump right in with the first
just
question.
jump into it. And I will say, we actually talked about it before we started recording. I saw the questions ahead of time, but I did not make a bunch of notes. None of that, because I wanted to be as just real and authentic in the moment. And I'm also recording it for
Mm-hmm.
video, so a little shout out to anyone that's watching it. Just because this is a really cool episode. So if I might word vomit a little bit or verbal process, that's just who I am. So let's jump
All
into
right.
it.
Okay, so the first question is, what has God brought you through in the past year and how has he grown you?
Oh man. Well, I can go into a little bit more detail. I've mentioned this a few times here and there in our podcast, but um just about over a year ago now, I had graduated Bible college the last year in June. Yeah, in June. Um, and at that moment,
Mm-hmm.
almost immediately after graduating, I lost the uh, like in school, you have something you have to do. Like you have assignments and you have tasks, and you keep working towards a goal. So I hit that goal after 5 years of doing that, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, what do I do now? I feel lost, and it kind of launched me into a depression. Um, and so over last summer, I was already taking some anti-anxiety medication. It was just kind of antidepressant as well. I started trying to change it. I was trying different ones with my doctor, and because I was like, well, maybe it helped me before. Maybe I need more. Maybe I need to change. I know your body gets used to stuff, and so um, I started this path of trying really, if you were to Google search anti-anxiety medication, I probably tried every one of them um, over the
Wow.
span of 4-ish months. And all it did was drive me deeper and deeper down into the dark. I
Mm.
So I went through like different courses or different periods of withdrawal, which it sounds like it is like you hear about people going through drug withdrawals as like illegal drugs, and it's bad. And well, it's real bad when you go through like a mental medication withdrawal. And so I went through different periods of that, and then I landed on one medication that took me so far down low that I was at the point of wanting to kill myself. That's just what it was.
Mm.
And we can That's a whole nother, you could do a whole episode on that, as a Christian and all
Yeah.
that. But that's just real. That's what happened. And so long story short, I went through that, and then I ended up going right back on the same medication that I was on for years, and that's where I sat for a while. Um, but then in about a year ago now, so going into the fall, I started therapy. And you guys have heard me say time and time again, I'm such an advocate for it, and that has really been what has helped me so much. But all that to say, I needed to build up that background because um, at the same time, I had been um, striving to this like unimaginable or unattainable goal of like, I had already worked as a pastor for different places, but I'm like, when I graduate, I'll finally be a pastor and I'll work full time in that position, and then I'll finally feel like I'm
Mm-hmm.
valid and I have my identity. And so in that
Mm.
time, God was really teaching me some lessons. And first of all, because in that I also realized that I was incredibly burned out of ministry. Started facing something called compassion fatigue, where you just kind of
That's another
lose,
episode right there.
right? You lose your ability to care. And I hate to say it that way, but I'm like, man, like my heart doesn't feel broken for the people I used to minister to anymore. I'm just like numb. And so God was really teaching me, first of all, I think, like, you know, ultimately, I could try to go to any doctor, but he's going to be the one that orchestrates real healing, right? But um,
Amen.
so, but he was really teaching me, like, first of all, that my identity was not in a job title, and it was not in a degree, and none of that. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I realized in that time that for however long it was, I was worshiping a false idol. And um you're thinking probably like, "Oh, he's going to talk about like some other crazy, I don't even know what," but the false idol was ministry. And it sounds kind of crazy.
Mm.
Um but
That's real.
I was so into like everything I did was based around my church and serving, and um not with my family, not with myself. I was so just gung ho on just serving, 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 um, that this idol worship almost killed me. Like I said, I reached this point. I'm like, I can't even be a pastor anymore. Like, what am I?
Yeah.
Um, and so God really opened my eyes to that, and kind of gave me a hard stop. And I like to explain it as, if you're on a train track and a train is coming to get you, and it's like, say it's a quarter mile away, it's still a ways away. God might be like eventually, or he might start with saying, whispering like, "Hey, get out of the way." Then he has to start raising his voice. "Hey, dude, get out of the way. The train's coming." Then he starts to throw like a pebble at you, and he's like, "Dude, do you not feel this pebble I'm throwing at you?" Then eventually, the train is about to hit you and smash you and kill you, and then he has to tackle you, and you slam onto the gravel, and you're all cut up and you're bloody and you're bruised, and you're like, "Dude, what the heck?" And he's like, "Well, you didn't listen to me before, but I had to save you." And
Mm.
so I really felt like um just really what the last year was really like a mental collapse. I was kind of writing for a while, I was getting by, and then I just hit down rock bottom, right? It was really that moment of um I had a lot of things I was doing for the wrong reasons. Like I said, I was idolizing things and titles and positions and jobs. And he's like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna have to do it the hard way. I'm gonna have to break you completely down, so I can build you back up, basically." And so, um, that was, like I said, from when I graduated to really to now. I'm still very much in that situation of trying to get better and seek healing. And now I'm gone probably 3 weeks without any medication. I've been trying to wean off of it.
Oh,
So
praise God.
which has been a big miracle because what I was taking was really, really difficult to get off of for how long I was on it. Um, and so that's been incredible. And I'm just trying to like go back to like neutral. Like I went a really long time of yeah, I was on medication. I didn't have like the worst thoughts in things, but I also didn't feel a lot of good either. I was very numb. And so I wanted to get myself back. And so now I'm gone to just 100% therapy and not any kind of medication to alter my brain anymore or anything like that.
Hmm.
But all that to say, what was your question again? Oh my goodness.
Well,
I
it's
went
just,
on such a whole thing. I want to make sure I touch it just right. Because that's
yeah.
been my
Well,
year.
well, the question was, what has God brought you through in the past year, and how has He grown you? And as you were speaking, the thing that kept really standing out to me was that what God has really done for you over the past year is just continually put you in situations where you had to be completely and totally dependent upon him, and
Yeah,
putting you in
yeah.
situations where you had to come to that realization that your identity does not come from anything else except for being a part of the family of God, being saved by,
Yeah.
by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, being his child, and that's really cool to hear about, that even through these really difficult situations that you've been in, that God has been using those to just draw you closer and closer to himself.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been really working on really the idea that I am not a I'm not a producer, I am not a technician, I'm not a pastor, I am
Mm-hmm.
not a husband. And I'll go even that far. I am Jordan. Period. And Jordan comes with a set of traits that define Jordan. But
Mm-hmm.
that is such an important distinction that I never made until recently. And so that's been a big thing of like trying to find my identity there, and I've always suffered with like, self-esteem and just identity issues
Yeah.
anyway. And so God's like, okay, well, I'm gonna rip away what you thought was your identity. Because you're not
Yeah.
listening. I'm gonna do it this way. And so it's been the hardest year. But also it's brought me to some crazy cool new things that we're gonna touch on. But and in that time, as a result of enough therapy and seeking God, I started this podcast with you. And that
Very
was a
true.
big
You
thing
wouldn't have been
because
able to do this last year.
no, and if you guys were to look in my notes app on my phone, I have notes from like 4 years ago of podcast ideas, like episode
Mm-hmm.
ideas, because I wanted to do it for so long, but I never could bring myself to do it. And so this is right here is an indicator of progress. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I guess then if that's all you have to say on that topic, we can probably charge ahead with the next question, which really ties into the
Okay.
first question, which is,
hmm
what do you feel that God is teaching you right now? We've talked kind of the buildup of this past
hmm
year, but what do you feel he's teaching you in this moment?
Well, I think the biggest thing is teach me obedience. I had been
Oh, yeah.
and this is gonna kind of tie back into me moving. I am really, really big on loyalty and being obedient and all of that. And so with my church, I will and have bled for those guys. I love them so much.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm like, okay, I'm loyal to them. But then God, really in about that same time frame, so about last year, started kind of like whispering in me, like, hey, you're gonna move. And I should back up and say my wife and I decided, a long time ago, eventually, maybe after we have kids or maybe after this or that, we'll move to Spokane. We love it there. And so that was
Hmm.
always there, but we're like, not for a while. I mean, a year ago, I had ideas to buy a house here in Sacramento and all that. So I was really focused on
Right.
staying. But so in God's process of trying to heal me as well, he started whispering to my wife and I, like, hey, you're going to move. And I'm like, well, no, of course, when God tells you something that you don't like or it's a little hard, you're like, I didn't hear you, God. No, that wasn't you.
That must have been my
No,
flesh.
yep, totally me. um, but if that's ever happened to you, you know that voice gets louder and louder until you finally listen. And so,
Yeah.
um, they're in that time and all this, God has become more and more apparent, and really over this year, and then really climaxing to very recently, he has given us a timeline and a plan, and all of that, and so he's been bringing me through, teaching me obedience. Going back to that, I've been so obedient to my church, and the last thing I wanted to do is leave them. They're like my real, like, actual family to me,
Yeah.
and so why would I want to leave, so but while I'm obedient to them, I have to be obedient first to God. And so God is saying, "Hey man, obedience is not always easy, but it is rewarding, and if you're one of the few that actually listen and want to come out of Egypt and into the promised land, I have a lot of great things for you." And that's kind of how I feel where I am now. Um and so now we do have a timeline of really just after the holidays. In February, I'll be a Washingtonian, or I don't even know what you want to call it.
Oh my goodness.
A spoken
Don't
night.
use the word Washingtonian, because our governor, whenever he does press conferences or anything, I have no idea why, but he seems to have some type of a contest with himself, which is how many times can you say the word Washingtonian in one sentence or in 1 minute or in one conference. It seems like every other word is Washingtonian. So,
Okay, yeah, I'm
although
a
I'm happy you'll be living in Washington, I'm kind of sick of that word. I'm going to be honest.
yes. Well, and so yeah, with that, like, God made a parent of our timeline, and then really has started to make kind of set some ways, and financially being able to, like, set us up to where we can actually afford to do it. And so I'm sure we'll get more into details there, but I'm really excited. It's been also the hardest thing, and this is actually this podcast is the moment I go public with that information. I have not told my, outside of, like, my pastor, and, like, my close family, no one else knows. And so you guys are the first to know. Like, this is the day I come out, and so that's kind of a weird way to say it. This is the day
Yeah.
I share news. And it's super scary, but again, like I said, it goes back to obedience. God's really been teaching me what it truly means to obey, and the fact that it's not always super fun.
100%. I think
Hmm.
that's so important. I mean, I think that obedience is really something that as human beings, we always like to downplay its importance
Right?
because we don't like to be obedient. We like to be autonomous. We like to be our own bosses. We like to be in control of things. And obedience can be very, very difficult. And the
Hmm.
process of God teaching you to be obedient in many ways is like the process of God teaching you to be patient. It is not
Mhm.
fun. It's a lot of a lot of work, and it's really a breaking down of self and a death to self and a constant continual glorification
Mhm.
of Christ. So that's really cool. I mean, just that it's just so apparent to you that God's been teaching you how to be obedient.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like I struggle with, hearing from God sometimes, and I actually related to that question earlier, quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
But one thing that has not been a question was this move, was obeying in this way. And so I'm really grateful for that, because if God was not clear, I would not want to, I already have a hard time doing it and trying to listen to him, but um like, having any sort of question would have been really hard. So I'm really thankful that I've
Hmm.
been able to tune in at least enough to hear God in that way. So,
Definitely.
mhm.
Well, the next question, I think there's a lot to unpack with this next question because it can be taken in a variety of ways. We can
Okay.
kind of address it. We can address it locationally, vocationally, spiritually, all of the above, whatever you want to do, which is, where do you feel God leading you?
Mm. Well, um, other than
To Spokane.
geographically, I think I answered that one. But you know, first of all, I think God has been leading me to find. It's gonna sound weird, but, like, to find balance. I've only
Okay.
worked inside churches, for I don't know how long. I've only been in the like the church realm or the ministry realm for occupation, and so
Pretty much like your adult life.
yeah, I mean, even before I was a staff member at 17 at my first church, doing
Oh,
stuff.
wow. Yeah.
And so I have not had that experience where, like, really, except for short periods of time where I actually go to church. You know what I mean? I'm always a part of it. And so when you do that enough, it can be really hard to still be in that moment. I talked about how, like, I like to, I'm really in the moment and worshiping when I'm doing my job, but that's not every time. It can,
Right.
in the same way as when you get a Bible degree, the Bible, you run the risk of it becoming just another textbook, right? Like, because you're in it all the time and it's like you have to study it and stuff. And so, um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm, I feel like he's pushing me to find balance in the fact of, like, for example, I'm not taking a job in a church to move up there, like I'm not even looking for, unless they
Yeah.
pop up, unless God was like, do this thing. I'm not looking to just transfer to another church, and continue that pattern, but rather to find balance and work in the secular realm. Um, and that jumps me towards to the next thing of, in this last year, I was up until then, I was so gung ho, I was going to get my master divinity, and I was just going to be, the textbook pastor, pastor
you
teacher.
were you were going to pursue ministry as a complete, like, your life was just going to be
Right,
ministry. That was
right.
going to be your vocation. That was going to be what you spent all your time doing, what you
Yeah,
studied,
full
all
time,
that.
more than full time vocation. Um, and I found that that is honorable and many people do it and all that. But for me, that was only going to perpetuate that idol of ministry, at least in this moment. And
Mm-hmm.
so, not only am I not working in church, this last year I stepped out of any pastoral ministry in general. I've been just working behind the scenes on a production level. Um, for that reason, I'm like, if I ever want to be a pastor again, I need to pause it now, because I was in severe burnout. But I meant to say that earlier. But so that being said, once I get established and everything up there, I'm going to be pursuing my master's degree in a secular area of communication. Um, and because I'm really passionate about it. I mean, we're communicating right now. Oh, excuse me. Um,
With each other and with the people that are listening.
yeah, and there's an area that God has called me to for a long time, and I haven't gone there yet, and that's teaching. And so I want to
Okay.
get my master's and then probably go past that, but I want to be able to teach. And my heart, on top of just, like mental health and thriving in that way, is also been, I feel a burden to create a better generation of Christians and pastors, that will come after us.
Wow.
And so I feel like with my undergrad Bible degree and then my master's, I'll be able to really bring a good, well-rounded approach, I could say, to teaching. And my alma mater, our alma mater, Epic Bible College is um I would love to work there with them and maybe teach there, and then um
Mm-hmm.
just wherever God sends me. And there's some other Christian schools up there, but all that to say, I'm excited because I feel like God's pushed me towards that way of, like, um not avoiding that part of my calling, because I jumped so headstrong deep into Bible, or not Bible, into, well, like, Bible degree and ministry work, that I lost sight of it. And honestly, I feel like we have enough really, really, really talented Bible teachers and theology teachers right now in the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
rather than becoming just another one of those, I'm going to go a different route and get that work in communication and teach things that way. And
Yeah.
um, whenever God calls me back to pastoral ministry, so be it. I will do that. But for now, that's kind of what it is. So he's bringing balance. That's the short way of saying it, right? That's what he's leading me into. Um, and I think I kind of captured occupationally and spiritually in one well-rounded answer there.
Yeah, you did. You really did. I think that's really cool. I think that if we look at the state of ministry today, things are headed more and more toward that bivocational model,
Right.
which is really kind of the original model. We look at the
Hmm.
first, the disciples, the apostles. We look at Paul, Priscilla and Aquila. We look at all of these people in the New Testament, and they were fishermen and tent makers and tax collectors and makers and sellers of purple cloth and doctors. And that was what they did as a vocation, but their life was ministry. And I think that's something we can talk about in a future podcast, is just the difference between ministry in the sense of a church or a parachurch organization or a Bible college versus all of our lives should be ministry. The way we speak, the things
Right.
that we do, the way that we serve other people, whether you work at a church or you stay at home with your kids or you work someplace else, whatever it is that you do, your entire life should be ministry. And we miss out on a lot when we just relegate it to church jobs. So I think that's
Yeah.
really, really cool.
And I'll tell you, I've had some far more genuine experiences recently, in terms of just living ministry and being that way than when it was my job, and I going back to the bivocational thing. It can be really hard to stay spiritual and genuine when there's the pressure of making sure you're able to make enough money to feed your family at the same time, because ministry just
100%.
doesn't pay, guys, like, unless you're and that it's not about money, but it kind of is, like, unless you're some mega church pastor and all this, like, it can be difficult. And so I definitely recommend to not go through my mistake and burn yourself out trying to do it all there. Like, um find yourself a good job to be bivocational in. And yeah, I was off on another train of thought and it totally went away. So like I said, being authentic, guys. um Back to you, Maddie.
Okay, back to me. Well, again, piggybacking, all these questions are kind of building upon each other. I kind of set it up that way in the hopes of kind of building a cohesive conversation here that will be beneficial to people. What are you most excited about for the coming year? We've talked about what God has brought you through in this past year. He's brought you through
Yeah.
a lot of really difficult things. We've talked about what's going on in your heart and your spirit now and where you feel him leading you. So what are you most excited about? What are you most looking forward to in this coming up year?
Yeah. So, with the exception of you and the rest of the Bond family, no one knows me up there, right? um, and
Right.
so I've been going through this process of God break, because we talk about how God will, you can get broken down and then reformed, right? And like he
Uh-huh.
and so I've been definitely going through that. I've been, I grew up here in Sacramento. Everybody knows me. But I've been reforming myself, and a lot of my old ways of thinking are gone. I have a lot of different opinions on things now, even in the last 6 months
Mm-hmm.
than I did before. And so I think what I'm really excited for is to take God's rebuilding of me and apply it to a new place where no one knows me, to where I can fully lean into
Yeah.
that new identity. Like, Paul talks about, uh, when the old man dies, right? The old man must die away to bring
Right.
to bring the new man. And so, I feel like that's applying to me beyond just having salvation, right? Like, I've been saved
Mm-hmm.
for a while. But I feel like I'm having another rebirth almost of sorts, where I'm able to have a healthier view of my own identity, and then take that and get to have a fresh, clean slate and meet new people and all of that. That's not to say it's going to be hard. I can't stress that enough. Like, um, if I wished God sometimes didn't tell me all these things, because it's been a painful time to not only go through, trying to get better with, like, my mental health, but then also the idea of saying goodbye to family here and stuff is hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I am so excited to see to see what I can see, right? Like I'm saying, is the fresh start. You get to kind of become your new person and all that. But then I'm also excited for what I don't see. I'm excited to see what else God has. Because I've learned time and time again that I do not have it figured out. I do not know what God has for me completely. Right? None of us do.
Well, right. I mean, it
Um,
says it says that we make our plans, but the Lord directs our steps. And I think that that's been very evident in what you've been talking
yeah,
about today. We make our plans, but the Lord directs our steps, and he's sovereign over all of it. And that's the most exciting part, right? Is
yeah.
getting to see what God does.
I'm also excited to see how God moves in my church context now. And what I mean by that is, you know, in my church, if there's any listeners that go to the church with me, the last few years have been painful. We've lost people, staff members, in really ugly ways, and it was not great. And so I'm excited to be an example for a situation where, like, a healthy situation for someone to move on from a church, if that makes sense. Like, I'm
Yeah.
excited to maybe set a new standard of, like, look, it's okay to leave. You don't have to run away hurt. You don't have to be angry. I that's been a big burden on my heart of, like, making sure I leave the right way and not leave because the enemy comes in and tries to take anything it can, right? So I don't want anyone thinking like, "Oh, did you hear Jordan moved away because of this crazy thing?" No, I
No.
no, none of that. And so I'm excited to also see God move in the next few months. There's a short amount of time left for me, and so I'm excited to see what's there as well before I even get up to my new home.
That is really cool
Hmm.
because our God is ascending God. And if we look at the New Testament church model, it's, we make our churches and then people get sent out and they make churches and they get sent out and they make churches.
Hmm.
And I think that it's a really cool thing. And like you said, the enemy likes to twist anything that he can. Anything that God has made that is good, the enemy tries to twist it into something bad. And so something that should be a very good, exciting time, being sent out, being sent forth into a new place, doing a new thing, following God's leading, can be twisted. The devil
Yeah.
can whisper in people's ears and try to incite gossip and slander and deceit. And so being able, like you said, to say, no, I'm excited about this. I'm being sent forth. And of course, it's bittersweet because you're going to miss the people that
Hmm.
God has brought in as that spiritual family for you. You can trust that it's a good thing. And I'm really hoping and praying as well that, like you said, it will be a healing time for your church, that this will start a new precedent for the future, that when God
Yeah.
sends people
Yeah.
out, it can be something that's celebrated.
And that's really been my biggest burden in all of this, and that's actually why I briefly mentioned that I'm recording it too. I'm trying to make a whole separate piece of content for the people that don't follow the podcast, so that
Uh
literally
huh.
I'm gonna put it on my socials, so that there is no question why. Because this
Yeah.
is only a good thing and only a move of God. The only bad thing about it is the pain of leaving. That's it. Um, and yeah, so that's just been a big burden on me, is to not let, especially, because when you do something that is in God's will, the devil definitely wants to mess that up, or take
Yep.
whatever. And so I already know it's going to happen. Something's going to come up, and so I'm um trying to be as connected to God and as in communication with my loved ones, and the people I influence, like, over communicate with them, just so that there is no opportunity for any bad to happen.
Yeah. 100%. Well, is there anything else that you want to say as we're closing here to anyone that may be listening? Anything you want to say to people? It can be about your own journey, about what God's brought you through, any piece of encouragement for people listening, just anything that the Lord's put on your heart to say as we close here.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am trying to, I don't know if I can look up the notes. It doesn't matter. It's something my pastor said, and actually, this was right about the time where I'm like, man, this is it, and, like, it's time. He gave, this is Pastor Kyle Johnson at the Crossing Church. I'm gonna plug him 100%. um, eh,
Plug.
so he spoke right into the depths of my soul when he talked about. He said, you know, there are people here that they know they need to do something. God wants them to do something. Like, they need to jump off the ship and go into the stormy water, right? They You need to go do the scary thing. And I just want to encourage people to take that step. We saw that when he stepped off the water, he didn't drown. He didn't go into the water, and he kept his eyes on Jesus. He went right to it. And so, all that to
Hmm.
say, if there's someone out there that is in a similar situation, you're like, man, yeah, God's calling me to do this thing. Um, I say just do the thing, and it's rich for me to say just do it, but that's what I've had to do. And there's a lot of, especially when it's scary, we make up narratives in our head, whether or not you're mentally good or not. Like, we make these narratives sometimes, and they're almost always not true. I was so afraid of hurting people's feelings or having people mad at me when I shared that I was moving, and it's none of that was true. It's only been a great time, and it's because I'm in God's will. And so I just want to encourage anyone listening or watching, um, if there's something that, like, God is calling you to do, and, like, trust me, it's much worse to be outside of his will. Like, it sounds
Yeah.
scary to jump off or to leave Egypt and go into the desert, but there is so much reward on the other side, because very few people actually do that, right? A lot of us stay comfortable in our lives, and we're like, you know what? I God had this thing, this dream I had, and it really felt good, but you know what? It scares me, and I'm gonna pretend it doesn't exist. All of that stuff. No, just do it. Because you have no idea what that promised land could look like on the other side. And if you were wrong and that wasn't what God had for you, well, God loves you and he has grace, and he'll be like, all right, well, you missed the mark on that one. We'll try again next time. So there's really, the only risk is in your head, if that makes sense. Like the biggest issue in this whole time for me was in my head.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess without word vomiting anymore, that's really what it is. Just please, guys, don't live in that stagnancy. Don't live just day to day, especially if you know that there's something else that God has for you. And if you don't feel that way, pray about it, because God always has something better for you on the other side. So I think that's where I would leave it.
All right. Well, you heard Jordan. Do the scary thing.
Do the scary thing.
And with that, it is time to say goodbye. So until next week, abide in Christ, love your neighbor, and never stop having the tough conversations.
Love you guys.
Peace. Thanks for tuning into the Church Vibes podcast with Jordan and Maddie. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we'd love for you to share it with your friends and leave us a review. For additional content and to stay updated on all the latest and greatest, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Talk Church Vibes. That's at Talk Church Vibes. See you next time.